Rock and roll, rock and roll. Hello, Earthlings, and welcome to the latest Still Alive. So, Ronnie, are you alive still or still alive?
I think so. Hopefully both.
Both.
Certainly
But,
feels that way.
well, I was thinking though, like when you're alive, you're never really still, are you? Ever, which is interesting,
Not
isn't
completely still. No, that's very
it?
true.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So if we were still and alive, we wouldn't be
It
alive.
doesn't really. The two words don't really go together, do they?
No, it's a contradiction in terms. So, as we're waiting for people to join
then
us,
you wouldn't say still dead, would you? You'd never go, well, he's still dead. So that's a contradiction in terms as well, isn't it?
Well, I do remember people going to Margaret Thatcher's funeral just to confirm that she was still dead. I think they did that.
That would have been horrendous if she'd risen from the dead and carried on, wouldn't it?
Nobody would be that bloody surprised.
You see, I had I was having a discussion with a Tory councillor, some years ago, who was a absolute. She said, the best thing that ever happened to this country was Margaret Thatcher. What a wonderful woman. And I said to her, I said, the only problem with Margaret Thatcher was that they cremated her 60 years too late.
Yeah, but that'd have gone down well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that went down well. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just make sure I've covered everybody. I've decided to do it this way instead of shouting them out. I think that's everybody now. Okay, so there's a new one. Just so I think I've got all of them. Another one appears, as you know. Right, so welcome along. So this is our eco-crisis special, I suppose you could call it, Ronnie. And we've got 4 items, and we thought we'd go through them one by one as per the description. So we're going to talk about how speciesism, as it were, created the problem, which might be the most contentious part of it, but we'll see. How veganism is a solution to the problem, and I think we'd all probably agree with that. That most environmental groups are speciesist, which is a problem. Is there anything we can do about that? And then how vegans often fail to appreciate that protecting the environment is part and parcel of animal liberation. So we can kind of take them in turn, I suppose. And we've got a few things to show. Ooh, I'm just pushing that one back to the beginning. So have you got any preference about what we start with, Ronnie?
Well, yes, in that order. I kind of want to explain, how speciesism has caused the climate and ecological crisis, because it's not just a climate crisis. We're facing the mass extinction of countless species of other animals as well. And it's a large part of that's to do with the climate crisis, but it's to do with other adverse impacts of humans on the natural world as well. Such as pollution, for instance. Increased industrialization, etc., etc. There's all sorts of impacts, ways in which humans adversely affect the natural world, and all of them are a problem. And speciesism is, in my view, the fundamental cause of this, because a huge driver of both the climate and the ecological crisis is animal farming. In fact, I would say it's the major driver, the major cause of the catastrophe that we're facing, and it's more a catastrophe for other animals that share this planet with us. No matter how bad things could get for humans, they will get massively worse for other animals, and indeed are already worse for other animals. For instance, there was a report just recently that came to the conclusion that 3 billion non-human animals perished in the fires, in the forest fires in New Zealand, which were really directly attributable to the climate crisis.
What was that figure? 3 billion.
3 billion.
Wow.
3 billion. Yeah, and that's just one incident. This is one incident, really, caused by the climate crisis, caused by global heating, and this is happening all over the world. With impacts on the food supply for animals living in the wild, on their habitats, and animals have been wiped. Other animals have been wiped out everywhere, due to global heating. So it's already hit other animals. It's already affecting them now as we speak. It's not something that could happen in the future for them. It's already happening.
Yes, absolutely. Well, maybe this will be a good place to have our friend Mr. Monbiot talk to us. Maybe, what do you think?
Yes, George Monbiot's produced an excellent video, concerning really this problem. So it'd be great to watch a bit of it.
Yeah. So it's over 5 minutes long. So we're just going to play the first 2 minutes, people. So add to stream, put it there, and then turn it on. Doing it a little bit different than I normally do.
There's a fundamental truth which most people just don't want to hear, which is that the greatest threat to life on Earth is farming. Farming? No. Hang on a moment. It can't be farming. Farming is the greatest cause of habitat destruction, the greatest cause of biodiversity loss, the greatest cause of extinction, one of the greatest causes of climate breakdown, one of the greatest causes of water pollution, the greatest cause of soil destruction, the greatest cause of water loss. Tick, tick, tick. All those boxes. It's farming which comes out either right on top or very near the top. Because every hectare of land that you're using for an extractive industry like farming is land not used for forests, for wetlands, for savannas, for all the other crucial habitats which are essential to prevent the collapse of our ecosystems, which will also lead to our destruction. For example, on one estimate, with just one more degree of heating, we'd see 32% of the surface of the planet drying out. We would see simultaneous droughts hitting an entire arc from Portugal to Pakistan at the same time. We're looking at enormous rates of soil loss, and without soil, there is no farming. We are totally reliant on this thin cushion between rock and air that gives us 99% of our calories. And yet we are ripping into it as if there's no tomorrow. The projections for future crop productivity are entirely dependent on using more irrigation water. Just one problem, there isn't any. It's already maxed out. The aquifers are shrinking because so much water is being drawn out of the ground. The snow caps and the glaciers from which mountain water comes, those are shrinking because of global heating. The water is not there. So we're going to need a whole new way of doing farming, a way which is both highly productive and low impact. One really thrilling new approach.
Yeah. Whoa. Stop.
Yes, I mean that's. I think a lot of people, including a lot of environmentalists, would be surprised to learn, what George is saying there about farming, being the biggest problem we have on Earth. And
that's on Double Down News if people want to check.
Yes,
check
but it's really good to subscribe to that. There's some excellent videos on not just to do with the environment, but on all sorts of other subjects as well. But there's three things George said there. I mean, he said first of all that that farming was the major cause of all these of all these kind of ecological problems. But in terms of the climate, he said it was kind of one of the major causes, and in my view, it is actually the major cause. And the reason for that is something called opportunity costs, because you see, there's a lot of talk about emissions. What causes the kind of the most emissions, most carbon emissions, and that's said to be the burning of fossil fuels. And then you've got emissions from animal agriculture. Normally are said to be around about 15%. So then that's claimed, or therefore, like, animal agriculture bears a 15% responsibility for the climate crisis. But what that fails to take account in is this issue of opportunity costs, and that is the amount of land that could be rewilded and therefore could draw the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if we didn't have animal farming. Because the situation is that about half the Earth's habitable land is used for farming, and 3/4 of that is used for animal farming. Right. So if we didn't have animal farming, and we went over to a much more efficient way of producing our food, and so free up huge amount of land which could be rewilded, which would mostly return to forest, and that would draw a massive amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So when you take into account this lost opportunity, we've lost the opportunity to do that because of animal farming. When you take that into account, there's a group called Climate Healers that have done a report on this, and they've come to the conclusion that animal farming actually bears an 87% responsibility for the climate crisis, for global heating, when the opportunity costs are taken into account. So I'd say from that it's actually the major cause of the climate crisis, not a major cause. I mean, obviously, the burning of fossil fuels is a huge contributor, and we need to stop doing that as well. That's obvious.
Well,
that
I
need
mean,
to do both.
Yeah, but even if it's not it's right up there in the same way as Monbiot just said, in the sense that animal agriculture is either at the top or near the top of just about every metric that you use.
And I said, I mean, he kind of seems to be talking about farming in general, but as I've just said, because 3/4 of farming is animal farming, and animal farming, plays a huge part in that. And of course, even in terms of crops, a very large percentage of crops that are grown on Earth are grown to feed animals, are grown to feed farmed animals. They're not grown to be fed directly to humans. And I mean, for instance, if we look at the UK, we've got it's estimated that the agricultural area of the UK, and all these figures these are figures that were kind of sort of produced by the Vegan Society, but they're based on various research, and a lot of this research is done by government departments, and from this, the agricultural area of the UK, in other words, the amount of land in the UK that's used for agriculture, all farming, is 72% of our total area of land, and the total agricultural area in the UK is about 17.6 million hectares now, right? And of that, the area used for crops is only 4.7 million hectares. So that shows how much land is actually used for animal grazing. Huge amount of land, because out of the 17.6 million hectares, only 4.7 million are used for crops. But if everyone in the UK adopted a vegan diet, we could feed the whole of the UK on 3 million hectares. In other words, we wouldn't even need all the land that's currently used for growing crops, because the hell of that land used for growing crops is used for growing crops to
for other animals.
feed
Yeah,
farm.
I mean,
So
the
it's
Vegan Society have always said that
that's it.
in a vegan world, we would be an exporter of food, not an importer, right?
So out of 17.6 million hectares currently used for agriculture, we'd only be using 3 million. And so all the rest of it could be rewilded and could go back. And not only would that help to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it would also be brilliant for other species, wouldn't it? You know, these are areas where animals, where free living beings, animals living in the wild, you know, could live, and it would be good all round. You know, it'd be obviously better for us as humans, and it'd be obviously massively better for other animals as well if we were, you know, we were all to adopt a vegan diet.
I wonder whether there's been any recent work on the soil, because the soil was something that the pioneers of the vegan social movement were really interested in. You know, Eva Batt talked about it in 1964, and Kathleen Janaway did. And of course, in the 80s, you had John Robbins' Diet for New America, all talking about this little kind of thing. I mean, how did he say it was kind of like the rock and the atmosphere, and there's this little layer of soil which we totally rely on. And I'm assuming that if we were to reforest, that would partly at least be able to sort that out as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, this country at one time was mostly forest. In fact, most of the world was mostly forest.
Yeah, same as Ireland, yeah.
And humans have destroyed it. And one of the major causes of forest destruction is animal agriculture. You know, this is why the rainforests are being cleared, either to directly farm animals or to grow crops to feed for farmed animals. You know, the Amazon, you know, is being devastated. But we've also got remnants of rainforests.
You're familiar with this one, Ronnie?
Yeah.
Henry Dimbleby's book, Ravenous.
I've not heard of that one.
No.
That might be worth having a look at. I'll see if I can get that. But we've got rainforest here. You know, we've got some residual rainforest. It's kind of on the west coast. I think there's some in Wales, some at northwest coast of the UK. But that used to be everywhere, and that's obviously temperate rainforest. Well, that would come back. You know, if we ended animal farming, and that land could be, you know, rewilded, then those rainforests would return. You know, we'd have actually you know, huge swathes of rainforest in this country as well. But I mean, going back to the original point, like, you know, about speciesism, well, obviously, you know, the reason you know, obviously the fact that animal agriculture is a major driver of the climate crisis, and the fishing industry as well. You know, the fishing industry is more to blame for the climate crisis than all aviation. And we often hear about, you know, how harmful aviation is in terms of creating driving global heating. But the fishing industry is actually worse than all aviation. And once again, this is kind of back to this opportunity costs. This, you know, the issue of opportunity costs, because it's not just the emissions from the fishing industry. It's the fact that activities like trawling destroys sort of vegetation on the seabed, and so, you know, actually prevents that vegetation from drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So once again, you've got that same problem. So the, you know, the fishing industry is also a huge driver of the climate crisis. And the thing is, had we had going back, you know, decades and centuries, had we had a non-speciesist human society where we were kind of, we had a society kind of based on vegans, certainly run by vegans, this wouldn't have happened. You know, we wouldn't be consuming animal products. There wouldn't be any animal farming. There wouldn't be a fishing industry, and we wouldn't have the problems that have been caused to the natural world and to the climate by those activities. So speciesism, so that's a huge area, of destruction, a huge area of problems for the natural world and for the climate that would have been avoided had everyone been vegan, or had the human species consumed a vegan diet, because the main ethos was veganism because the people running the show were vegans. So that's really that's the situation with in terms of animal farming and the fishing industry. Now, the other main driver of the climate crisis is obviously the burning of fossil fuels, and that really dates back to the Industrial Revolution, which is like 18th century. It started really not from where I live in the Black Country, and there's a horrendous place called the Black Country Museum where they celebrate all this, and people, it's kind of held up with pride, but it's kind of, to me, it's probably the most depressing place in the world, because it kind of is a symbol of where all this horrendous industrialization started. And of course, way back then, at the start of the industrialization, people didn't realize that the burning of fossil fuels would be a huge contributor to global heating, and would be a major driver of a climate crisis. Of course, people didn't realize that at all. But what they did realize was that the industrialization and the pollution caused by that, the destruction of habitat caused by industrialization, was having an adverse impact on other animals. They'd realized that this was causing pollution to rivers. They'd realized that there was being destruction of the natural world caused by this industrialization, and that therefore other animals were suffering and dying. But the fact is, they didn't care. They didn't care, because of human supremacism, because of speciesism, because it was felt, this process of industrialization is of benefit to the human species. Now, I'd argue about that. I kind of don't accept any claim that it actually was, but that was why kind of humans. It's more really of benefit to wealthy members of the human species rather than anything else. But
well, what else is new, Ronnie?
Well, exactly. You see, but had at the time, had we had a vegan-run society at the time, that would never have been allowed to happen, because people would have been aware of the harm being done to other animals by this industrialization, and it wouldn't have been allowed to happen. It wouldn't have been allowed to happen because it was, we can't do this. We can't do this. We can't set this process. We can't go down this road whereby all these other animals are going to be destroyed. That it would have been unacceptable in a vegan-run society, and so it wouldn't have happened, and so we wouldn't now have the problems caused to the climate through the burning of fossil fuels, because it would never have reached the degree that it's reached.
Yeah, so we've got a situation where combining our first two themes then is that the situation wouldn't have developed in a vegan world, and now we would need a vegan world to try to put it to rights if we have enough time, which is always going to be the kind of problem. And going back to what you were saying about the other animals being the first to, be in trouble, then that's followed by the poor and the developing countries, and then it will be the poor in developed countries, and the people who are most responsible for causing it all will be the last to be affected by it.
They still will be affected, though, even in their bunkers underground or wherever they're going to go. Their life, the quality of their life will still be hugely diminished, which is why I argue that the people that are in charge of things, that comprise governments throughout the world, that the people who are in charge of things aren't just bad; they're actually mad. Because like somebody who's bad will do things to harm other people, but they'll be really careful that they themselves aren't harmed. If someone's bad and mad, then they're not going to, they're going to do things that harm other people, but they're not going to kind of realize the harm that will eventually kind of cause themselves. And so
isn't that a timescale thing? People would reason that, oh well, I'll be gone by the time all that happens, right? And so it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of lip service for human rights. It's just that it was almost like there's no respect for the future generations of humans, even if you just restrict it to that.
I think a problem is, and I think it's a general problem with humans is that in general humans aren't capable of seeing anything at any great distance. That they tend to concentrate on what's immediately in front of them all the time, and we see this in all aspects of life, where they're not kind of that if something is going to happen at some time in the future, they kind of don't really think about it. They're just focused on like kind of immediate problems and immediate threats, and something that's might happen.
I mean, the politics of the world usually revolves around 4-year cycles as well, so that's all short-termism.
Yeah, short term, yeah, and that's the problem, and so people don't tend to think, anything at kind of a distance, and so it's a kind of problem that kind of is in a sense kind of within humans, but really, it would be the duty of government to kind of to kind of encourage people to think at to think at a greater distance and to think at a greater depth, and to act in a way which will prevent problems that may arise in the future. But governments don't do that. They go along with this general trend in people. They go along with that, as you say. They kind of they're only there for like 4 or 5 years. So it's all short term stuff. And that is a really major thing. We have to get people thinking more long term. And of course, it's going to come to the point when it's not long term anymore. But by that time, as soon as it's like immediately right in front of us, then it's going to be too late.
Yeah, well, that's always been the problem, isn't it? The fact that we tend to be reactive to things, and this has always been an issue. And again, we're back to the fact that in the developing countries, so-called, we are going to be the last to really get it in the neck, as it were. And so, therefore, I mean, the main thing the world is interested in is kind of Hollywood and the football league and this kind of stuff. We're not looking at that kind of stuff because it's not interrupting our daily.
Well, I think governments encourage people because they're self-serving, because they kind of want to make money for themselves and their mates. they don't want people to resist, and so all this pap has been provided as a distraction. It's a diversion, isn't it? And it's like what was it said was the opium of the people in the old days. I can't remember now.
No, I know. It's gone. Yeah.
But now it's television, isn't it? It's like Love Island and the Champions League, and it's all that, isn't it? That's people would rather watch that. People be watching that, and the world will all be burning around them, and they'll be watching like. Well,
it's kind of bread and circuses, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's up to like to have the people that are kind of in charge of things, shall we say, for want of a better way of saying it, it's kind of their duty and their responsibility to kind of educate people not to be like that, and to not kind of and to kind of encourage people to get engaged with stuff but they don't want people to get engaged because that would mean they can't carry on like with their self-serving in their self-serving way, because then people would, I mean, if you look and see the stuff that's happening, all the time, all through recent years, people's rights have been, in this country, have been eroded in different ways. And that
was it. Religion is the opium of the people.
Religion is the opium of the people. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably still is for some people, but less so these days. I'd say it's more like television now. To be honest, they're really yeah.
The royal family. Let me just say that please continue to use the comments. We don't make people pay to have your comments on the screen.
We'll put some comments up in a minute.
So you can feel free about that.
So that was really, why in my view, speciesism is the fundamental cause, because if we were not living in a species society, we would not have the climate and ecological crisis, because we would not be doing those things that harm animals, to such a massive extent.
Well, here's a question that's come in from David or David. I'm not quite sure. We'll find out tomorrow how he pronounces his name. And in fact, Colleen asked me to raise this too, because she can't make it today because of a family commitment.
You see, the thing is, yes, because this kind of, often, with the environmental movement, there are kind of two elephants in the room. Or in fact, there's a cow, and there's not two elephants. There's actually a cow and there's a penis, because one thing that like a lot of our
did you say penis?
I said penis. Yes, indeed.
Oh, right, okay.
A gigantic penis in the room.
Just
because one thing, the two things that environmentalists tend often not to talk about is like animal farming
and penises,
or our consumption of animal products, and human overpopulation. Because I think there, in my view, there's no doubt that the human species is grossly overpopulated, to the detriment of other animals that inhabit this planet. And so, yes, I'm not saying that I wouldn't describe myself as an anti-natalist. I mean, I don't want a situation where the human species ceases to exist. But I would like, I'd like to see a situation where there are fewer of us, and that's
the kind of human extinctionist movement. But I mean, I don't think obviously, antinatalism as a term is seen as in pejorative terms now. But I seem to remember, and you more than me, Ronnie, in terms of publications, because you published quite a few of them. I mean, the vegan movement have talked about the population explosion, as it was called, for many years, right? And so it was something that because of the fact that what you've said is the fact that we encroach on other animals' territories and habitats and everything. So we've always been interested in population control, but it's now called antinatal.
Yeah, what we've got to remember, though, is the biggest population explosion is the population of farmed animals, because there's was some research that came to the conclusion that of all mammals on Earth, if we can consider the numbers of mammals on Earth, and they've done it by biomass, in other words, they've done it by weight, that 60%, that 36% is comprised of humans. 60% is farmed mammals, in other words, cows, sheep, pigs, etc. And only 4% are like wild mammals, free living mammals. Only 4%, right? And so the rate of increase of population is far greater for farmed animals than it is for humans. So the biggest population problem is in terms of the population of farmed animals. And obviously, in a world where everyone consumed a vegan diet, then that problem would be solved. But even if that problem would be solved, the ratio then between humans and wild mammals would still be 9-to-1. There's been 9 times more humans than wild animals, so it'd still be, and that would become less, because obviously with areas, huge areas of the Earth being rewilded, numbers of wild mammals would increase. But but it would take a hell of a lot to kind of to turn that around, that kind of 9-to-1 ratio.
One thing that links all this together, whether you're talking about a consideration of the size of the human population, but also the water use. It's not, in percentage terms, it's not a great deal, but a lot of water is held in us, and a lot more is held in those domesticated other animals that you're talking about.
I think one kilo for 1 kilo of beef, it takes 15,000 liters of water.
But I'm talking about actually inside. I mean, we're made of
water. Yes,
So
that's right. But then, of course, so are all these. This 60% of mammals on Earth that are farmed animals. They're largely water as well, and they need to drink water and consume. So this, going back to this water crisis that George Monbiot spoke about, I'd say that's largely caused by animal farming, because the huge amount of water that needs. I think a kilo of to produce a kilo of fruit, I think it's 1,000 liters, and to produce a kilo of vegetables, 300. And as I said, a kilo of beef is 15,000. So that's the difference.
Saying that nuts is quite high.
Yeah, nuts are about, apparently nuts about 9,000. So they're quite high, because I suppose the trees need a lot of water, but it's still nowhere near as high as beef.
That presumably feeds into the problems with almonds then, because in terms of water use, almonds is pretty bad, isn't it?
Water use and use. There's huge, this huge sort of oppression of bees. Because bees are transported all around to fertilize the almond trees, and
now, before we proceed, can I just say there's been a prolonged discussion about whether guns are vegan in the chat. Can we,
guns are vegan?
Can we kind of close that down now and concentrate on the subject?
That's kind of crazy. I mean, why would people? Yeah. I mean, they maybe don't contain animal products, but guns can, guns are used to kill. And
don't you inflame the conversation either, Ronnie?
But guns and are these guns that are going to be used to kill other animals, or are they guns be used to kill other humans? Either way, it's not great, is it? Either way, it's not great.
It isn't. No. I want to move on to this really interesting thing about most environmental groups are species, of course, which, essentially, Steve Best has been saying all of these kind of things. He said it during the Total Liberation speech in Luxembourg, 2013, and basically saying that if we want to forge alliances, we need to find a way of speaking to that kind of group, because if we want them to understand the fundamentals of their own problem, they don't seem to be in our terms, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the difficulty is you see environmental groups, talk about preserving the natural world. They are concerned about destruction of forests. They are concerned about they are concerned about like the destruction of the ocean and ocean habitat and stuff like that. And obviously those things they're concerned about cause huge slaughter and suffering to other animals. And the environment movement it tends to be concerned about extinction of other species as well. See, but that to be concerned about the extinction of other species isn't anti-speciesism, because
it's a repeat of our problems always with conservationists.
It's conservation, because you see the thing is that you see let's take an example with racism, right? Racism. Now, say if I was to say, well, look, I don't want to see any pygmy people killed, because there are really quite, the numbers of pygmy people on Earth are really quite few. So they're like a kind of, you could say they're kind of an endangered race. But Chinese people, it doesn't matter if like a few of them get killed, because their species isn't in danger. Like their race isn't in danger. It's like loads and loads of Chinese people. So it matters if a pygmy person gets killed, but it isn't really that important if, you know, some of the Chinese people get killed. Now, if I was to say that, it'd be racist, wouldn't it? I'd be immediately accused of racism, because racism is concerned with the importance of the individual. It's concerned with the importance of the individual, not just the race as a whole, but with individual members of those races. You see, and it's the same that, you know, being concerned about the survival of a species can still be speciesist. If those people concerned about the survival of the species, are not concerned about the individual members of those species and the rights of the members of those species as individuals, if you see what I mean. And what tends to happen is the environmental movement tends to be concerned about species as a whole rather than individual members of those species.
Yeah, well, I remember. Do you remember? You might not remember this, but you know, John Wynne Tyson. He had a book called Extended Circle, didn't he? And he had a couple of editions. And you were in at least one of them. I think you might have been in both editions. Do you remember what you said?
Well, I said something that what matters to you was, I think, we've talked about whales and sort of
whales.
What matters to a whale is like whether that whale, that whale. Or the whales themselves. What matters to the whales themselves aren't being persecuted as individuals. That's what the main thing that matters to a whale, rather than what happens.
Yeah,
to
that's pretty well remembered. Since that was, I think that was what mid 80s. I think. I think what you basically were saying, that it doesn't matter to an individual whale whether they're the last one of their species or not. If they're as it were being oppressed,
I mean, I think it could matter in terms of, like, if they can't find companionship and they can't find a mate, and I think that's that's kind of that would be something very negative for them. But I think it's what in terms of the extinction of species, what really matters to the individual members of species when it comes to the extinction of species is when the extinction of their species impacts on them as individuals. In other words, there's going to be a process of extinction where those animals, get wiped out, and during that process of extinction, like, those individual animals are going to suffer and are going to perish, and so the extinction of a species will affect the members of that species as individuals. Well, what's important to those members of those species as individuals is what happens to them as individuals.
Well, I understand that, and of course, one of the problems we had with conservationists was the fact that the more a species moves to extinction, the more they rise in terms of their concern for them. But often it's based on things like, going back to the whales. I remember things about, we want to save the whale because otherwise my children will never get a chance.
That's right. It's not for the benefit of those members of those animal species as individuals. It's about, the world's going to be a worse place for humans if there aren't any whales anymore. Or if we kind of wipe out these species and we sort of disrupt the web of life, and we disrupt the ecosystem, then that's going to be worse for us as humans. It's all human centric. It's all about kind of about the effect on humans. It's nice to see these animals in the wild, and if we aren't able to see these animals in the wild, if we're not able to any longer appreciate the fish in the river,
the question, though, Ronnie, is if we're talking about most environmental groups as speciesist, and if we're actually looking at the same problem almost like from diametrically opposite directions, you've had much more contact with, say, the Green Party and everything than I have.
Yeah.
What can we do to influence them, or is the divide never going to?
I mean, I'm still involved to some extent with, with the Green Party, especially really kind of my local Green Party.
But so are they listening then? That's what I'm asking.
The Green Party as a whole, the problem with the Green Party is on paper the Green Party, certainly the Green parties throughout the world vary tremendously one from another, and some of them are pretty terrible. I don't think the one over there in Ireland is that great. The one over here, Green Party of England and Wales, their policies on like animal protection are really very good and far better than any other political party. Any other parliamentary.
You said they're buried, right? You said that they.
But the problem is they give them no priority. They give them no priority at all.
So what's the point of having them then?
Well, they've got them because people with sort of animal liberationists within the party have kind of, or animal protection campaigns within the party have kind of put forward these policies, and these policies have been passed. But they give them no priority. And what should be top priority? For all, for the Green Party, what should be the most important thing we need to do, us humans as a species? The most important thing we need to do is to stop oppressing other animals, and that should be the very top of the political agenda. And the reason for that, out of all the atrocities that occur on Earth, and there are tremendous atrocities and horrific problems imposed by humans on other humans. That's yes, of course, and we need to urgently do something about that. But by far the greatest atrocity, by like a kind of a country mile or whatever, might be a huge more than that, huge measure of distance. It is the oppression of other animals by humans. Worldwide, we are killing 50,000 other animals every second for food, when we could all survive perfectly well on a vegan diet. 50,000 animals every second we're killing for food, and that's not taking into account the huge number of other animals that perish because of adverse human impact on the environment. And that's a huge. I mentioned earlier the 3 billion just in that one incident of the forest fires in New Zealand, the 3 billion animals that perished. That's a huge figure. And then you've got the hunting, you've got the animal experiments, you've got the animal racing, you've got the zoos, you've got the circuses, you've got all the other ways in which other animals are oppressed by our species. And this is horrendous, and that should be top of the political. That should be the number one focus of our species. Is how do we end that? How do we cease being oppressors? How do we end this systematic exploitation and oppression of other animals? That should be the top. That should be top priority. That of course we should deal with all these interhuman problems as well. But the top priority should be, we have to end speciesism. We have to end this oppression of other animals that our species is causing. And yet it's kind of nowhere. Where is it? Even in kind of left-wing circles, where is it? How often? I look at the I look at the Guardian every day. And I look at the app on. I've got the app on my phone, and I look through it. Now, how often is there anything there, a story in there about the oppression of other animals by humans, and that we need to end it? It's hardly ever. You might get some, kind of article about animal welfare or something like that, and occasionally
usually in the food section as well.
Yeah, the importance of, but it's no, it should be number one. It should be headlines every day, shouldn't it? It should be the number one priority, and it should be the number one priority to the Green Party.
Well, Ronnie, you're well on the way. You're well on the way in Britain, because, as we know, you're a nation of animal lovers. So that's you're well on the way.
I mean, this is coming on. This is something I might like to kind of as an additional thing to talk about at the end, because I'd like to say a bit about animal rising at the end, because of course that sort of feeds into this. And it was animal rising.
Going back to this thing, point 3, most environmental groups are speciesist, and we know that someone like Best would say we're not strong enough on our own, and they're not strong enough on their own. We've got to come together, and we need to form alliances. But you're kind of saying, you've had years of it, and you're not getting very far, and they're not listening. I mean, is it kind of never the twain shall meet, or what?
Well, I think you have to engage with other people. Otherwise, you're never going to change them. You're never going to educate them. So you kind of have to engage with other people. And I'm kind of pleased that there is a group within the Green Party that's kind of promoting veganism, within the party. And I'm pleased I was kind of involved in kind of setting that up. But
Okay,
I
so
think
how is that going, Ronnie?
well, basically they kind of, when there's a party conference, they'll have stalls at the party conferences where veganism and animal rights is the Vegan Society often has stalls at the Green Party conferences as well. So there is that going on. But you see, I think kind of my approach now to politics is like kind of it's got to be approached at a more fundamental level, because why is say a party like probably the most progressive parliamentary party, I'd say they are the most progressive parliamentary party kind of in the UK, the Green Party. Why are they still deeply speciesist? Why are they still human supremacist? Right, and the reason is, to be quite honest, because there are
Everybody else is.
Well, first of all, because everyone else is, but also because there are relatively few vegans involved in that party to push the anti-speciesist message. And so if we're going to change any of this, what we have to do is to greatly increase the number of vegans. Because if we want more vegan politicians, where are they going to come from? They're going to come from the general population, and you're only going to get more vegan politicians if you've got more vegans in the general population.
Fundamentally, we're talking about what we need is cultural change.
What we need is cultural change, yes, because
we're going back to vegan education, as we always do, because it's always the solution to everything.
The political change, really comes from cultural change, because if you kind of have an advance in vegan culture, if an increasing number of the population become vegan, then more vegans will become politicians, and there'll be more vegans for vote for those politicians. So in the end, you'll kind of change you'll change the the nature of governments, because you'd have a government that's kind of comprised of vegans, or where vegans are the kind of the major force.
Yeah, what I'm trying to tease out, though, in a way, is that you can do that through vegan education, which is looking at cultural change, because the politicians will follow cultural change. It's not as though all vegans have to kind of get involved with the nitty-gritty.
I think some politicians will. I think the current lot of politicians we've got in power, they're wedded to a certain ideology. This is the problem, that if politicians are wedded to an ideology, with kind of probably most of them are.
Yeah, but if we revolutionise the culture, that ideology would go anyway.
Well, what we have to do is replace those politicians with politicians.
We've got to replace the ideology.
Yeah, if you replace those politicians with politicians who have a different ideology, say have a belief in veganism, then kind of you kind of change the whole thing then. But that can really only be done through vegan education, because that's the kind of that's the way you actually change the culture.
Well, you see, I mean, this is valid in the sense that,
well, the thing is, how do we get a new system? You see, now you see, I kind of say that this is the difficulty, isn't it? That kind of and I'd kind of say that, like, you've got kind of these you've kind of got environmental groups. I mean, it's something that Extinction Rebellion say, that we're kind of we need system change, and and they're kind of not great on like sort of promoting individual change really. And there's this thing about we don't want to blame anyone as individuals for anything, and it's system change we want. And I think that's similar to that's what Animal Rebellion was saying as well.
It's a bit vague. I mean, I know that we've heard this phrase system change now for about
what
2.5
they're doing
years.
But it's not. But their actions really aren't aimed at system change. What they're aimed at is.
But what do they mean by it anyway, Ronnie?
Well, it's kind of. I think that the difficulty is that the kind of their actions are aimed at actually forcing the existing system to make changes.
Yeah,
their actions aren't aimed at system
right?
change.
No,
and that's not going to work because you've got people that are really fixated in a certain ideology, and that's all that's happened with all the kind of protests and stuff that's been going on. What's actually happened is that the government over here, and they're doing it in other parts of the world as well, in response to climate protesters and other protesters, they're bringing in more draconian laws to combat protest. That's what's happened. They've not listened to the protesters. What they've done.
But we've got examples of the futility of this approach. In the sense, you could think about the hunting ban. You could think about the long campaign, which was going by the time I kind of started to get involved with the movement in 1977, but I was in it definitely in 79. And the anti-battery cage thing was going already, led by compassionate farming, and of course, if you're asking a speciesist system for change, you end up with crap. So you end up with not battery cages, you end up with enriched cages, and then the hunting ban is not worth the paper it's written on.
You get a huge amount of effort for just a few crumbs from the table, and to me, system change it's like, well, kind of. I think we've got to be realistic about how we achieve system change. And I think the thing is that kind of the idea that there's going to be this big revolution and people are going to rise up in the streets and the government's going to be overthrown. I think we can forget that. That isn't going to happen. Let's be realistic about what, about kind of, how humans behave. I mean, kind of how the only way I can see it happening is to, for us to elect politicians that have vegan principles, to create more vegans, and then you have, as I said, then you have more vegan.
I get that, Ronnie, but you're hitting the same brick wall here.
Yeah, but I can't. But then when you get that particular, when you get that kind of that vegan government in power, then that government can.
But the existing system won't allow that in the same way.
Well, I think you've just got but
I mean, look what they did to Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, but you see, the reason that what happened to Jeremy Corbyn was that Jeremy Corbyn was a radical leader of the kind of moderate wing of the Tory party, which is the Labour Party. He was brought down by right wing Labour MPs. Jeremy Corbyn had huge support of the grassroots.
But I mean, Corbyn wasn't even far left.
He was brought down by right wing Labour MPs. But if you didn't have those MPs, because if we'd elected
and the right wing press and the right wing establishment,
the thing is, if we have enough people, this is the problem in terms of like kind of propaganda. We're up against a huge propaganda machine. We're up against the propaganda of the right wing press, in terms of if we're going to kind of if we're going to kind of create this sort of like a kind of vegan system, so to speak. The only they've got the money, they've got the newspapers, but like we've got the numbers, or we've got potentially got the numbers. When you think like the huge number of people that are vegan who consider themselves vegan, we've got this huge potential if we can get a lot more of those people active in spreading the vegan message. They've got the money, but we've got the numbers, you see. And so I mean, Jeremy Corbyn came very, very, very close to becoming prime minister of this country. He came very, very close to becoming, really surprisingly close, right? And so it kind of is possible. And I think if we if we can mobilize sufficient number of vegans to do education and to spread the message and to persuade more people to become vegan and to kind of, become vegan, not just in terms of a diet, because this is, this is like really important. Veganism isn't a diet; it's a philosophy of animal liberation. It's much more than a diet. A diet's an important part of it, but it's much more than that. And if we have a sufficient number of people kind of believing in that, it doesn't have to be a majority. I think probably the figure we'd probably be aiming at is probably about 25%. And that's a lot, but it's a lot less than 100%. Then we could really turn things around. And so I think that's that those forces that kind of brought down Jeremy Corbyn kind of wouldn't exist, because we'd have sufficient vegan members of parliament elected to prevent that from happening.
Well, it's an interesting one, and of course it's got to be from the bottom up. It's got to be that, and so this is why our movement is.
See, this is the thing that you see. System change relies on individual change. This idea of like, don't blame people as individuals. I can see that. I don't want to go around saying I blame you, I blame you, I blame you. Like,
not about blaming, is it?
It's not blaming, but we bear responsibility as individuals. All of us bear a moral responsibility of individuals for our own actions. And you can't take that away from people and say that, oh, it's not your fault, it's the fault of this or the kind of system. But the system doesn't exist separately from ordinary people. It isn't something that's kind of been imposed on us from the sky. The system, we're all the system in a sense. We're all the system. I mean, like the government we've got now, horrendous government in this country, they didn't come down from the sky. They were elected by, about 29% of people eligible to vote. They were actually voted for. They were voted in by people, by ordinary people.
Yeah.
So,
well,
unless you change people as individuals, then you're not going to change the system. So system change relies on individual change. So stop saying that individual change isn't important and it's all about system change. You don't get system change without individual change. So that it kind of seems so obvious to me that that it comes from individual change.
I can tell by the tone of your voice.
Yeah, I know. It's like, what's the matter with you? Don't you see that? And
you'll be tearing your hair out next, Ronnie, if you're not careful.
The most important thing is educating people to change their mindset, educating people to change their view of the world. In terms of, as I said, like, educating people to adopt an anti-speciesist attitude, but both in practice and in their like political outlook.
This would help, wouldn't it?
Well, yes. And one of the main problems in terms of like, and this is a problem that's like kind of as faced the Green Party really, is that in our first past the post system, that the smaller parties lose out because what happens is that, for instance, you've got an election in this country and you've got like a Tory, and you've got Labour, and you've got someone from the Green Party, say, to simplify it. There's people that kind of would their favourite candidate is the Green Party candidate, right? But they'll vote Labour to keep the Tory out, because they fear that if they vote Green, then that allows the Tory to be elected, you see, because it's a first past the post system. Whereas if you had sort of some kind of single transferable vote, which is a form of proportional representation in a sense, that you kind of that would enable people, you can mark your choices, first choice, second choice, and so forth. And so that would enable people to really vote for who they believe in, because what happens is now, people vote against people instead of for people. They vote for whoever's the most likely to kind of beat the candidate I dislike the most. I mean, I vote like that. I voted like that, because I wanted the Tory out, and I've thought, well, who's the most, left of centre candidate here on this sheet that's likely to beat the Tory, and that's how I'll vote, because that's realistic. But that isn't how it should be. You should be able to vote. You should feel free to vote. for kind of who you believe in, and so that's what we need. But kind of we're not going to get that. We're not going to get proportional representation in this country with the Tory government. First of all, you've got to get rid of them first of all, and then hope that the administration that kind of takes over could be.
Well, I think Starmer has gone back on commitments to that.
Well, in actual fact, I think PR would actually be beneficial to the Labour Party, to be honest. But they were against when we had a referendum on it a few years ago, and the Labour Party were against. It was I forget the name, but it was called Alternative Vote or something. There was some name given to the system. It was a form of PR that was being proposed, and because the major parties campaigned against it, because it's in their, at the time, they felt it was in their interest to kind of keep the existing first past the post system. But we've got to change that. That's kind of really important.
Now, Mr. Lee, we're over the hour. Do you want to tackle the last thing, or?
Well, what I want to talk about is the next thing we've got here is about vegans failing to understand why protecting the environment is a fundamental part of the animal.
Do you want to do that?
I think they're kind of different. I think there's some people call themselves vegan that just think it's about food. Just think about, does this contain that? Their only concern is, does this contain animal products? Doesn't matter about anything else. Doesn't matter about what horrendous companies.
This is part of the big package. In the sense we talk about neoliberalism and everything. Our movement is not as radical as it used to be, and that's a sad thing, because being involved in a social movement is supposed to radicalize you. It's supposed to kind of revolutionize you, but really, you could only describe the modern day vegan movement as counter-revolutionary, if anything, because it's based on things like consumption. So it's no surprise that people coming into our movement think it's all food-based. It's no surprise that the journalists, they want to talk to you about food. And like we say, if the Guardian writes about our movement, they put it in the food section, for God's sake.
Because it's but veganism isn't and never has been just about food. I mean, the diet, having a vegan diet is a really important part of it, because the main way in which humans as individuals contribute to the oppression of other animals is through their diet, is through their consumption of animal products. When you think that that's the kind of, out of all the areas, the oppression of other animals in the world, the food industry is the greatest. Like I mentioned. Yeah,
but
earlier.
You see, what someone like Cross said was that veganism is a principle, like a searchlight, and you can aim it at different things. And in fact, that's even in the modern day definition that most people don't even focus on, the bottom bit of it, which is often missed out from loads of people's discussions. But basically, he was saying, well, veganism is a justice-based principle, and you can aim it at our dietary thing as you can to other things as well.
Yeah. See, veganism is a justice movement. Veganism is a justice movement. It's about, and so it comes. It's in the same grouping as anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-homophobia. It's in that grouping. It's in that grouping of movements, so to speak. It's a justice movement. And it's not just about diet. I mean, the diet's a really important part of it because of the huge oppression of other animals caused by the food industry. But it covers it's opposed to all oppression and all exploitation of sentient life. That's what veganism is. And if you look at what the founders of the vegan movement said, that's what.
So why is there a big pushback in the modern movement about caring about the environment?
Well, I think the first like I'm talking about the different categories of people that call themselves vegan, and that's the first category, the ones that call about diet. But then there's another category of people who it's not just about diet. They actually are concerned about they're concerned about other issues. They'd be opposed to animal experiments, they'd be opposed to the fur trade, they're opposed to hunting, they're opposed to all these areas where other animals are exploited and oppressed. But for some reason, they kind of don't consider that human adverse human impact on the environment is an animal liberation issue. And like, for instance,
It's weird though, Ronnie, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it seems so obvious.
Yeah, well, but I think it's going back to this thing about, you know, what I said earlier about people only seeing what's immediately in front of them, and I think it's to do with that, because you see where animals are oppressed by adverse human impact on the environment, it can be a little bit like kind of one removed, you know, from, you know, stuff happening directly to animals. For instance, if a kind of woodland is cleared, and we've had a lot of this, like with the construction of the horrendous HS2 railway, you know, where this habitat of other animals has been destroyed, and therefore those other animals perish as a result. Or we've got the climate crisis, which is kind of, yes, it's largely driven by animal agriculture, but it's also driven by burning of fossil fuels, and so, you know, that's an issue. Prevents ending the burning of fossil fuels is an animal liberation issue, because of the horrendous impacts the burning of those fuels in driving the climate crisis is causing,
and just getting those fuels as well.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, transport is an animal liberation issue, because, you know, the huge number of other animals that are killed on our roads. There are more animals killed, more foxes killed on roads in the UK than are killed by hunting. You know, 50,000 badgers. I think it's like 30 million birds are killed on our roads. When you think that, you know, the number of, people quite rightly make a big fuss about animal experimentation. That's 4 million animals a year. But 30 million birds are killed by these metal objects flying along the road. And that's an issue. We have to do something about that. We have to try and kind of solve that problem. And this is why I say that, you know, campaigning, you know, promoting public transport is an animal liberation issue, because if we can get, you know, fewer, you know, better public transport and fewer cars on the road, then that's going to kind of, you know, that's going to reduce the impact of motor vehicles on other animals. It's an animal liberation issue. But like, kind of a lot of people, a lot of vegans don't see it, because it's kind of not, it's because it's not like somebody being cruel. Oh, there's this individual person being cruel, and, you know, like somebody going out and hunting a fox, right? Somebody going out and like killing a badger, right? So that's where I'm angry, and that's what I'm going to, you know, kind of do something about, and that's what I'm going to focus on. But like, you kind of start talking about, you know, the adverse effect of on other animals of the climate, you know, the human caused climate crisis, or of transportation, or of other things. They kind of, with a lot of people, they kind of don't they don't see it. Their eyes sort of glaze over, because it's a result of, it's not a result of like an individual person being cruel in their view. It's a result of like a system which we've created as humans, but we're all responsible for that system, and we're all responsible for changing it.
I think that's
still our fault.
Yeah, well, I think there's something in that, and I think that, in fact, in Andy's excellent film, and look out for the director's cut soon, people. But in Andy's film, you've got a quote from Lee Hall, and she said essentially what you're saying here is that because of people focusing on suffering, it leads them into the kind of welfare paradigm, and they get trapped in it almost. And so I think there's something in that. And so this thing about there's always something in front of you and you can't see beyond the hill, as it were, because you're dealing with the immediate. I think there's a lot in that, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's, I mean, obviously suffering is caused to animals by this kind of more, the system, you know, the more systemic oppression, as in terms of like, you know, pollution of the natural environment. But that still is caused by humans, and that is still something for which we're all responsible. And just because you can't finger out an individual person and say it's down to that cruel person that's done that, just because you can't do that, doesn't mean that that's any less an issue, and doesn't mean that's any less a thing that we should campaign against and try to do something about. It's still a result of what I'd say the kind of human imperialism, you know, that we kind of, that the human species, we you know, we don't inhabit the earth. If we kind of inhabited the earth, we would be living in harmony other animals, and
You say that we occupy it, don't you?
we occupy the Earth as an occupying force, like a kind of imperialistic. That's why.
What do you think of this point here about the transport talk? Sounds utilitarian to me again, about reducing suffering and harm.
Well, I think it's Well, you see, the thing is, it's about what's realistic in terms of like creating change, isn't it? Like, kind of, how do you if we have a problem of like motor vehicles killing other animals, then how do we go about solving that? How do we go about solving that?
So it is utilitarian in that sense, then.
It is, but then like a kind of a lot of the way we kind of go about things ourselves is sort of utilitarian. I mean, I give the example of, say, like, I kind of I did a stall on Saturday. We had a local environmental event. It was like a kind of family day, to do the sustainability festival. And I did a stall there promoting veganism, but I drove there. I had to drive there in my car with all the stuff for the stall in my car. Now, obviously, driving to there, I'm having an adverse effect on the environment. Like, there's emissions coming out of my vehicle. There's some risk of my vehicle being involved in a collision with another animal on the road. I mean, thankfully that didn't happen, but there's always a risk there. So there's a minus there, but then, because I'm doing a stall promoting veganism, there's a huge plus. And so weighing up those two things, and that's a utilitarian calculation, isn't it? And we do that. We do that all the time, and I think we can't kind of we can't avoid this element of, like, utilitarianism in our lives. We're doing this all the time. We do it all the time, and I think, realistically, yes. I mean, realistically, we have to kind of recognise that this issue, say, just the issue of transport, like, it isn't acceptable, because what we've got to remember is, like, it's not the deer that's crossing the road, it's the road that's crossing the forest. In other words, we've driven these roads, through the territories of other animals, so we've kind of we've invaded their territory, and so, but how do we solve that problem? This is one of these things that kind of, there's not like a quick and easy solution to it. It's like, like in terms of, like, the consumption of animal products, in terms of the harm that kind of animal farming, causes to the planet and causes to the animals that are farmed themselves. There's a quick and easy thing we can all do, and that's to stop consuming animal products. That's really a quick and easy thing. But, like, when it comes to stuff like transportation, and when it comes to kind of like stuff like the burning of fossil fuels, for instance, and those things, it's not so quick and easy and clear cut as that, because the system has made it so it's not so easy and clear cut, and so we have to kind of go through a process of ending those things. You've got to go through a process of changing our transport system.
Well, even in the vegan world, there's going to have to be transportation.
Yeah,
isn't there?
Yes, but we would look at how can we have transportation while minimizing the impact on other animals, and indeed of the impact on humans. I mean, I'd like to see, for starts, I'd like to see a national speed limit of 30 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, nationally, and 20 miles an hour in.
You used to say 20 across the board. You've gone soft, Ronnie.
No. I've said 20 in kind of built up areas and on country lanes, and 30 elsewhere. I mean, if it was 20 everywhere, I wouldn't care. We don't need to. Why is everyone? And that, the lives that would spare in terms of other animals and in terms of humans as well would be immense. Why do we have to go so bloody fast all the time? What's the matter? It's just crazy, isn't it? It's
all to do with speed. Should vegans not drive cars, Ronnie?
Well, I think what we should do is try and minimise our. You see, that once again, this is a problem with the system, that we're trapped in a system where kind of, people have to work, and where people have to kind of, are more or less forced to use cars for a lot of things. And one of the reasons for that is our public transport system is so poor. So it's kind of not. I wouldn't say that vegans shouldn't use cars, but I think vegans should try and minimize the use of cars, and should, work towards a system where the use of cars is brought to an end, or where it's minimized.
And
Because
also,
you see, the
I
vegan,
think,
when you talk about, like the definition of veganism is the vegan society definition talks about as far as practicable and possible, doesn't it, in terms of us kind of avoiding the exploitation and cruelty to other animals. Now, that I don't really like the cruelty to, I prefer oppression there instead of cruelty. But that's as far as in our everyday lives, because we're kind of trapped in, we're sort of trapped in this system, aren't we? That in order to survive, we have to, we're kind of part of doing these things that are harmful to other animals, and because of that, because of us being kind of bound up in this, we're kind of forced to kind of do our best in that situation, aren't we? It's a bit similar to like people taking, like people taking drugs for an illness, right? That like they may be taking like a drug that actually keeps them alive, and that drug has been tested on other animals, and that drug is supplied by a company that does experiments on other animals. What's that person to do? If that person's a vegan, what's that person to do? Are they going to not take that drug and die, or are they going to continue to take that? And you see, that's a moral dilemma, and that's an example of like kind of sort of doing our best in within the system in which we're trapped. And that's kind of like I'd say is somewhat similar.
Well, I suppose it's a case by case.
Yeah, that's right. It's about. It's not like a kind of, because I think there's this problem really that to think that it's all to do. It's all similar to the avoidance of animal products, because if you're looking at like the first thing that kind of vegans tend to think about is like, how do I avoid animal products? And I'll be people are so meticulous about like, I'll avoid, try and read in the packets and like avoiding animal products and that. And like, it's kind of,
but that's not a bad thing, right?
But that's not bad. No, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's kind of, but that's a kind of, that's the sort of like easier bit to do in other ways in which we, in which we can sort of contribute to, I suppose, the systematic oppression of other animals. It's much more difficult to be as clear cut as that. Like for instance, if you bank, you've got your money in a bank, then there's there I don't think there are any banks that are totally perfect in terms of what they invest in, and how those investments might somehow drive harm to other animals. But like, you do your best, you try to find the sort of the most ethical bank.
I thought all vegans kept their money in their mattress, Ronnie.
Well, yeah, I suppose, but yeah, I mean, that would probably be a way of like of being kind of totally ethical and not putting not putting money in banks. But of course, realistically, most of us do put money in banks, and so this is another thing where it's not possible to be perfect, but we're trying to do the very best that we can.
Well, I do remember that Francione once argued that rights-based people are sometimes forced to be utilitarian, but that doesn't mean that would become your position. It's just that you sometimes have to kind of do it from.
I mean, like another example is like situation with animals that are animals like dogs and cats, for instance, that there's huge overbreeding of these animals, and a lot of them get killed as a result, and kind of are suffer appalling treatment as a result of that, and that's kind of arisen out of human selfishness, that I want this, I kind of want a dog in my home, and I'm going to go to a breeder and buy a dog and encourage the breeding of these animals, encourage the overbreeding of these animals and stuff like that. And kind of like, so what happens in order to combat that overbreeding is people get their dogs and cats neutered and spayed, don't they? Now that's kind of in a sense that's appalling, because these animals really should be should be living in the wild. They're not even native. Dogs were originally wolves, and cats aren't native to this country. They come from the Near East originally. But because of the way that humans have behaved, we're in this dilemma, aren't we? That really, and we have to choose the lesser of two evils, which is like neutering and spaying these animals, when really, they should be, living in their natural habitat.
Yeah, well, that's right there. I mean, neutering, spaying on the face of it is a rights violation.
Well, yes, that's what I'm saying. That it's not.
Yeah. They're not consenting, are they?
But because the system that we're entrapped in, that's been caused by other people, that's been caused by non-vegans, because vegans would never have allowed that situation to rise. Had we lived in a vegan run world way back, we wouldn't have turned wolves into all these different shapes and sizes of dogs, and that was all done. All this kind of selective breeding of wolves into all the different breeds of dogs was done in order to facilitate the oppression of other animals. Because when you look at the dogs, you've got herding dogs, you've got hunting dogs, you've got like a dog like a dachshund. Dachshund is German for badger hound. They were used to hunt badgers. Go down the badger. Yeah, they were all used. Humans selectively bred wolves into all these different breeds of dog in order to oppress other animals. And now that kind of what's happened, we're kind of, that aspect of it was diminished, but now these dogs are bred into all these different, kind of different breeds just for the titillation of humans, and as a result, because of the inbreeding, a lot of these dogs suffer congenital problems, don't they? And so that's a totally selfish act from way back by humans. Now, had we had a vegan controlled society way back, that never would happen. We'd never done that to wolves. We wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't have ever done it.
I mean, just think about beagles. I mean, the reason that beagles are popular in laboratories is because they're docile and also short-haired. So,
exactly, and that's another thing. Once again, you've got these. I mean, beagles were originally bred as hunting dogs. And the same with greyhounds. Greyhounds are like oppressed by the racing industry, but they were originally bred as hunting dogs.
Well, I mean, you've even got the exploitation of other animals built into the way we describe them, like scent hounds and sight hounds.
Yeah, scent hounds and sight hounds. Yeah, because the greyhounds would hunt by sight. Obviously, beagles are scent hounds. So you've kind of got that. But what I'm saying is because the situation that we've been put in because of non-vegans and the behavior of a speciesist human society, we're forced to choose between the lesser of two evils. And I think that that happens in lots of other situations. There isn't the ideal third option doesn't realistically exist.
No, it's always irritated me, Ronnie, when you've got non-vegans essentially walking up to us and say, we've created this terrible problem, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, exactly. We're expected to solve their problem and to kind of to tackle problems that have been created through a speciesist human society. But I think it is important. You see going back to this thing about the about sort of vegan science. You see, if you take two people, you take say someone that is like meticulously reads all the packets and meticulously sticks to a vegan diet, but they fly probably 2 or 3 times halfway around the world on holiday every year. They've got umpteen kids. They drive a guzzling SUV. You take somebody like that, for instance, compared with someone that doesn't do any of those things, that rides a bicycle, that just has a little holiday down the road, that has no children or one child, and that occasionally slips a little bit on the diet and occasionally eats the odd bit of whey, has the odd bit of whey powder in their food or something. Which of those two people has a worse impact on other animals? It's the one that flies around the world and all that. They have the worst impact, don't they?
It's a very uncomfortable calculation.
Yeah, but it's true though, isn't it? That is true. You see, so really, to me, it's about impact. To me, it's all about impact. It's about minimizing our adverse impact, minimizing the adverse impact of humans on other animals. That's what it comes down to. And a big part of minimizing that impact is obviously avoiding a huge part of minimizing that impact, both in terms of the animals that are directly oppressed and the animals that are indirectly oppressed to the harm caused to the environment is by avoiding animal products. That's the biggest way of minimizing the impact. But we have to pay account to all these other things as well, because all these other things adversely impact on other animals, and that is totally to do with being vegan, to try and avoid those things and to try and minimize those things.
Well, it's interesting, and we're on 90 minutes, but also we have a special tomorrow, which we're both involved in, and that's at 6:30 our time, isn't it, Ronnie?
There's one thing that I'd kind of like to say, to kind of end, and it really to do with animal rising, right? Because I sort of, referred to them, previously in this, in terms of, because they were previously Animal Rebellion, and there was this thing about like, kind of, they've kind of borrowed the system change thing from Extinction Rebellion, because Animal Rebellion kind of came out of Extinction Rebellion because people were dissatisfied with the lack of attention Extinction Rebellion were giving to animal farming, and that was why Animal Rebellion was formed to focus, originally on on kind of getting the country to move to a plant-based diet to combat the problems caused by animal farming. And so they would kind of speak about system change. But as I said earlier, the important thing is, individual change drives system change. We have to change people as individuals, both in terms of their behavior as individuals, but in terms of their mindset. And then since the mindset comes from the behavior, the two things the two things are together, I think. And I kind of, I think that they're kind of, they're potentially a really important force for change. But there's kind of, there's like, there's several things I'd like to see them do. And, I'd like to talk briefly about that in order to improve, because I see this kind of, the type of direct action they do as kind of being really important as part of the overall, the overall process of moving us to the right sort of society in terms of not oppressing other animals. I kind of, I think what we've seen is like we've seen them kind of move from campaigning against or taking action against sort of the food industry, against animal agriculture, to doing like other things. The rescued beagles, and they've carried out direct action against the Grand National, and they've announced they're going to do the same about the Epsom Derby. And kind of much as I support those things, I support any actions that are kind of aimed at, against human tyranny over other animals. I'm really wondering if they should stick to the food industry, see, because overwhelmingly that is the area of the greatest oppression of other animals, both in terms of the direct oppression on the animals that are kind of, used by the food industry. And also on the impact of other animals in terms of the destruction to the environment and the natural world caused by animal agriculture and caused by the fishing industry. And like kind of, but by like attacking those, by attacking those targets, or maybe taking action against, they wouldn't like the word attack, but by taking action against, that industry in various ways, like they did the dairy blockades back in September, which I thought that was like a great action. That then the message can be put out to people to go vegan, right? Because and that's the most fundamental thing we need people to do. We need people to become vegan in terms of their diet, and to become vegan in terms of their philosophy, right? If you're taking action against horse racing, if you're taking action against animal experimentation, it's difficult to include that in your message. You probably could include it, but it's not it's not such a the vehicle for including it isn't so strong. So I'd really like to see them focus on.
I mean, wouldn't they say? I mean, obviously we're talking about single issues, but wouldn't they say that you can do all of it? And with this here, Anya, it's attention, exposure, and
well, yes, but you see, the thing is, it depends what you do. Their actions against the dairy industry got a lot of publicity, but there's something else I'm coming on to, which might address this point as well.
Okay.
So and really, like I'd like to see the aim clearly to raise public awareness. It seemed to me that kind of somehow in the past the aim has been to somehow let's force the government. We do this action. We want to force the governments, pressure the governments to create change. But it's obvious this government isn't going to do that. And the only way we're going to do that is to have a radical change of government. And the only way that we're going to do that is to change ordinary people and to educate ordinary people to become vegan, right? So the main aim, I'd like to see the main aim of their activities is to raise public awareness through the publicity that they get through their actions, whether it be in the national media, local media, social media, whatever. The raising of public awareness is important as that process of vegan education. And in terms of the actions against, as I said, against animal agriculture and against the fishing industry, what's happened in the past is that the message has really been primarily about the environment and about climate crisis, and quite often nothing's been said about the plight of the animals that are directly oppressed by those industries. The plight of the fishes, the plight of the farmed animals, and I think they should lead with that. I think that they should lead with what happens to those animals, what happens to the chickens and the cows and the sheep and the fishes, whatever industry that they're kind of campaigning against, and then bring in the climate as a second, because otherwise it's a little bit like saying, sort of taking action against this, like say the slave trade and saying, we're taking this action against the slave trade because it's destroying the economy. And which some people did use that argument against the slave trade. They said, that they used an economic argument against it, and then not saying anything about the plight of the slaves or saying that in kind of very small print at the end. It's obviously the main victims of animal farming and the fishing industry are the animals that are directly oppressed, and so that should be first and foremost what's talked about. And the full thing that I'd like to see them do now, I'm not saying it's by way of criticism. I think that they're kind of that they're a really important kind of development within the movement, but it's just some suggestions on how I think it could be better. The fourth thing is to kind of be more autonomous. We talked about this in a recent show about the importance of autonomous actions, rather than kind of looking for like big centrally controlled actions. To kind of just let people in local areas, just as long as they operate according to a sort of set of principles, just let them organise and carry out their own activities, and to get publicity locally in local media for those things. And this addresses the earlier point about, yes, the horse racing, that did attract big publicity, but it's not going to always do that. You can't keep, eventually the media is going to get fed up with people running onto horse racing tracks, and it's not going to be big news anymore. It might be, it might be for 2 or 3, but in the end, it's not going to.
Isn't that likely just to be timing, Ronnie, in the sense that they changed their name and then it was the Grand National time, and so in some ways they were forced into doing that, and so that was the first thing they did after they changed the name. But presumably, if they'd have changed the name at a different time, it wouldn't have been the case. It might have been about.
I'm not sure. I think things were moving that way because, of course, originally it came out of Extinction Rebellion. It was all to do with the climate, and then all of a sudden they were rescuing beagles from a laboratory animal breeding place. You know, so completely different, nothing to do with climate. You know, so it's kind of sort of, you know, strange in a way. You know, not that I think it was great that they rescued the beagles. You know, that's brilliant. But what I'm saying is that if you're going to concentrate on something, I'd say the most fundamental thing to concentrate is the food industry, because that's the major by miles responsible for the oppression and exploitation of the most.
All I'm saying, speculating, is that maybe they are gonna. It's just that they haven't yet because of the horse racing thing got in the way in a way.
Yeah, but yes, but you see, you could have groups all over the country in local areas take an action against local outlets connected with animal farming or the fishing industry.
Yeah, but we're back to the fact
that
they won't do that, Ronnie, will they? Because we're back to that fact that people like big events, they like prime mover to tell them what to do. We're back to that problem.
Yeah, but that mean, you know, but that kind of emphasizes the importance of encouraging people to organize their own actions and give them help and encouragement to organize their own actions and to act autonomously, because then you get a lot more actions. You know, like a really, really good example of this is the Animal Liberation Front. You know, why was the ALF able to carry out so many actions? Why was the ALF able to spread so rapidly all around the world? Why? And one of the major reasons for that was to do with autonomy, was to do with the fact that, you know, we had some very simple principles. As long as people abided by those principles, they were able to call themselves the ALF. And because of that, because people were free, there wasn't central control on people. The only thing, you know, the founders of the ALF wanted was that people just abided by the principles, and like people did. And it kind
they did, but Ronnie, the phrase "that was then and this is now" come to play.
But you see, that's, you know, that's an example of how something can kind of spread everywhere, and the amount of publicity that ALF actions got in local media was like huge, and that was, you know, without you know, particular attention on that. Like, you know, in some ways our main aim wasn't publicity. Whereas with the type of actions that Animal Rising are doing, the publicity side of it is like really important. So more emphasis would be put on that. And also and the other thing I think that's really important is just in terms of, like, you know, practicality. If people are doing things that break the law. And this is an entirely different sort of direct action to what we were doing. And we were doing like things that were regarded as seriously criminal, that could get you put in prison for 10 years, as I myself experienced. Well, it wasn't 10, you know, I wasn't in for totally 10 years, but, you know, but nevertheless, you know, even on people being like arrested for minor things, you know, what you've got to take into account is the cost of travel to the courts. You have to make several court appearances. Is that you even if you don't get like a fine, you've got to pay costs and stuff like that. So there is like a money element to this, you know, particularly with the traveling. And if people are carrying out that kind of direct action in their local area, then they're going to be appearing in court locally. They're going to be at a local police station, and they're not going to have the huge travel costs that, you know, people are having to travel. Like where they took the action in Scotland against the Scottish Grand National, there's people from south of England. Well, they're going to have to travel to Scotland. How many times are they going to have to travel to Scotland to appear in court and stuff? And how much is that all going to cost? And that's a practical consideration. If you have localized actions, you're going to be dealt with locally by the legal system, and you're not going to have that expense. You know, and that's a really practical consideration. And I think a lot more actions could be carried out if there was this decentralized kind of structure to it. You know, like learn from what the ALF did, and, you know, like what we achieved. And of course, you know, doing the type of action that Animal Rising could do is actually, I think, kind of in a sense more important than the ALF, because it's because it's much better for raising awareness. It's much better. We weren't interested in raising awareness. We were just interested in causing economic loss to, animal experimenters and the fur trade, etc. But if you're concerned with raising awareness, then you can kind of, it actually is much more capable of creating fundamental change, as I've already mentioned. So that's the kind of, and stop the nation of animal lovers thing. This isn't a nation of animal lovers. Please don't say that. It's not true. I mean, isn't one of the things, I think one of the principles or notes of Extinction Rebellion is tell the truth. Tell the truth. They want the government to tell the truth. Well, I think these organisations themselves should tell the truth, and like Animal Rising themselves should tell the truth. And the truth is that this country is not. We are not a nation of animal lovers. It's nonsense. This is a nation of people that, are shoving the corpses of other animals down their throats every day. This is not a nation of animal lovers. Just kind of stop. And we don't want animals to be loved. We want animals to be respected. So kind of don't use that. Don't say something that's not true.
And also paying for all that food with banknotes which have got animal derived products in it as well, which is ironic.
Well, you see, this is another thing that was imposed on us. That what can we do about? The £10 notes and the £20 notes, wasn't it? They contain some kind of animal fat in them, in making them, and there was a big protest from vegans.
It's gelatin, isn't it, Ronnie? Gelatin?
Yeah, I think it's from pigs. Yeah, was in there. So of course, people from the Jewish and Muslim community were complaining as well because they didn't want to handle,
a nation of pig lovers.
Yeah. But
right.
This is the thing. So like that's. I mean, that's just some practical suggestions. I mean, they're an organisation that I very much admire and always have done. And the thing is, at the end of the day, at least they're doing something. And the problem we've got really with the vegan community is that we've got so few vegans that are active, apart from like not consuming animal products. They're kind of not really active in any other way, in like promoting veganism or protecting other animals in any other way. And that's the kind of major problem. And at least, I might kind of, sort of, have some constructive criticism to make of, people that are campaigning in other ways, but at least they're active, at least they're doing something.
It's tallow, apparently.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to 2 hours now, Ronnie, so I think we ought to draw this to a close. As I said, we've got a special tomorrow as well, 6:30, with a panel of people. And we're starting off by talking about something that Angela Davis, the famous vegan human rights feminist, said recently, and picked up by one of the welfare corporations. So we're going to start off with that. But I think the dread intersectionality issue.
I'll tell you what, there's one thing. I better say this. I know it's making this show go on for much longer than it probably should. But in the write-up, I was going to say that I was going to talk briefly about because I went on there was a big Extinction Rebellion event in London weekend before last, and Louise and I spent a couple of days there. And I think this this thing about the speciesism of environmental groups kind of was evidence there. I mean, there were vegans there. There were people carrying vegan signs, and we had one ourselves to encourage people to go vegan. We had some leaflets which we didn't give out ourselves, but we were able to give to other people to give out, to encourage veganism amongst the participants. And there was like they did a street theatre there, and this is just like an example of the problem. And it was about the River Wye here in Herefordshire is heavily polluted by runoff from chicken farms. There's been loads of chicken farms allowed to be built, near the banks of the river, and it's killing the river. It's absolutely killing the river and killing all the life in the river. And the main kind of player in this is Cargill, because Cargill, I think, supply the food for the chicken farms, and they have a big involvement in the chicken farms. And so they did this street theatre where there was like a woman who was representing it was like a court case where there was a judge, there was a woman representing the River Wye, and there was a guy representing Cargill. And the guy representing Cargill, they only had him wearing a rat's mask. They had him wearing a rat's mask, and they had these other people dressed as chickens with them, and they were like the baddies, right? So first of all, there was speciesism there, like, you know, having him wear a rat's mask, and they were calling him Corporate Cargill, Corporate, you know, instead of corporate, play on that. And so you know, this is like kind of, you know, appalling speciesism. You know, it's like kind of, he shouldn't have had a rat's mask. He should be there as a human. It's not rats that are the problem. It's humans. And you know, where rats are a problem, it's only because of what humans have done, and humans have created that situation. So there was like this speciesism there, and like you know, the chickens with him, like somehow portrayed that they were like the baddies. And also, nothing was said. You know, it's all about, you know, the life in the river being killed by this, you know, runoff from the farms and all that. And that's, you know,
well, the baddies because they go to the toilet and can't help it.
That's awful. Because they go to the toilet because humans have crammed them into these big sheds just because they want to throw chicken down their throat, you know. And nothing was said about the primary victims of the chicken farming, which is the chickens themselves. Nothing was said about them.
And
so there was like, you know,
the
whole thing was like completely riddled with speciesism.
Who organised this?
You know, and you think, you know, why aren't they aware of that? Why aren't they aware of that? And they've done it before, and I've complained to them before about their portrayal of humans as rats in order to denigrate the humans. And we see the same with, like, you'll get like you know, left wing groupings will portray police as pigs, and they'll even have, like, you know, cartoons of, you know, a police officer with a pig's face and that. Speciesism, you know, like, kind of, you know, what's that? You know, it's the humans that are problems. It's not pigs. You know, pigs are oppressed by humans. You know. And you know, if you know, probably if the police really were pigs, they'd probably do their job far better, perhaps. You know.
So what group are we talking about here, Ronnie?
Well, no, I think in terms of what I'm talking about in terms of the street theatre that had the guy wearing the rat's mask, that was Extinction Rebellion. That was like an event organised by them. It's an example, and like a kind of, you know, we went twice on the coach down to London to the two events, and like, you're going along on the coach and you're overhearing people, you know, you can't help, you're not deliberately listening, but you can't help overhear other people's conversations. People talking about their dinner and, you know, eating animal products and eating other animals, and someone was talking about, you know, eating venison because venison was like better for the environment than eating a cow or whatever. You know, what's the matter with these people? Speciesism is the fundamental cause of the climate crisis. So, like, kind of, why are these people behaving in a speciesist way? You know, don't they realise? Well, obviously they don't realise. But like,
do they have the kind of online equivalent of a magazine that you could submit an article to?
Well, I mean, I've emailed them in the past about when they portrayed. You know,
yeah, but that's just going to go to the leadership. I was wondering whether they've got a forum where you can talk to the rank and file.
I don't know. I mean, I've expressed this to my local Extinction Rebellion group, and really they're quite sympathetic to what I said. You know, but it's obviously something to do with the kind of like leadership of XR, that they've got this, you know, that they're still speciesist. And it's completely
I mean, that's the reason why the Animal Rebellion split away from them.
I think that's the reason why they did, and I think Animal Rising complained about what I'm saying as well. About that.
You know, but I mean, the kind of political point there is that if they'd have stayed in there, they'd have had a lot of voices within. I can understand that, and it's always very difficult in terms of. But I think they probably wanted to carry out their own actions. They wanted to carry out direct actions. In relation to animal farming. I mean, they did some actions against, they blockaded McDonald's, didn't they?
was it the year before last? It was, in certainly in recent years, which
and
was
they couldn't do that under XR.
no, I don't. Well, I think it would have been difficult because XR are very focused on fossil fuels.
Are there anybody that are in both camps, do you think?
I think that, yeah, I mean, there are vegans within. There are vegans. I know vegans within XR. I know vegans within XR, but they tend to more campaign on the fossil fuels. But that's just an example. Like I was saying, these environmental organisations that speciesist, when don't they realise that speciesism is the fundamental cause of what they're campaigning against?
Well, clearly not. I mean, education is needed, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's all down to education, and and it's all down to really getting out there and spreading the vegan message as much as possible. And if vegans are listening to this, then get active in doing outreach in your local area. I've never said that before, but I thought I might say it now.
Well, it's always nice. It's always nice to come up with something different, isn't it, Ronnie?
But listening to our show, like you mentioned, Roger, we've got a show tomorrow night to do with something Angela Davis said, wasn't it?
That's it. Yeah. That you don't have to be a vegan to oppose the systematic abuse of other animals. That's what she said, and then it was made into a wider context by one of the welfare corporations. So we'll kind of show the clip and then discuss that. So that's where we'll start anyway with it, and it'll expand from there. I'm sure, because like I said, there are some people who want to talk about intersectionality and the pros and cons of all that. Right. So thanks for sticking with us, people. 2 hours. Sorry about it being a little bit long, but blame Ronnie.
I think it was. It's not our longest one, though, is it? We did have a longer one.
I'm sure it isn't. Yeah.
But there's a lot to talk about, really. I think it's not. It's quite a few different points there.
Well, okay. Now, thanks to Joanna for looking after the chat today, as ever. And so we'll be back next week, Ronnie, but we'll be back tomorrow even, Ronnie, providing...
If people want more of us, they could tune in tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's the same... It's on your channel, isn't it? And what time is it tomorrow? It's 6:30, isn't it?
6:30 British time, yeah.
If people haven't had enough of us, there'll be more than us, though. There's other people on there as well, so it's not just us.
It certainly is. It's a good job, isn't it? Water us down a little bit. And
yeah, we'll have to shut up.
We will be there, won't we, Ronnie? Provided
we are still alive.